I want to say thank you again to Mark for hosting this webinar and for the work he's doing in the Central East Regional Group, and that I'm Peter Bowden, and that it's a pleasure to be with all of you tonight, especially those of you who are working with membership. That's an area that's really close to my heart. In 2001, I started the Unitarian Universalist Small Group Ministry Network website, which has grown into an independent nonprofit supporting small group ministry in our association. But that work with small group ministry in trying to help people connect with others in our congregations through small groups really led to issues of membership and how do we specifically move people from being on the edge of our community into the center. With congregational life, you work in one area and it's connected to another. So it's really exciting to be with all of you who are focused on membership and really helping to welcome people into our communities. So here is the plan for tonight. We covered nuts and bolts at the end of the presentation, and we are going to focus on presentation first with clarifying questions. We'll have time for really open conversation. So I will be moving quickly, but feel free to ask questions and through the chat, and we'll hit those as they come up. So small group ministry and membership development. The thing that's exciting about being here with all of you who are working with membership is that we're finally at a point where our congregations are starting to really pay attention not only to membership issues, but staffing them. So it's exciting to see the Membership Professionals Network developing, and I want to thank you for all of your work. One thing that I've noticed as I've been working with congregations on membership and growth, building community and small group ministry, is that one of the biggest problems with our membership development, as I experience it, is that there are just some big areas in our congregational life and the way that we try and connect people where people are just falling through the cracks, people who want to be members, who are showing up as members. And I even had the experience recently of moving from Newport, Rhode Island, where my wife is serving as the minister of our congregation there, to being in Boston. And I've been visiting churches, and I've been experiencing that a little firsthand. So my goal for tonight is to share some information that I hope is going to help you spot the areas where we have people falling through the cracks, and then we're going to talk about how we can use small group ministry to attend to that. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk just briefly about the path to membership, what that looks like, and just some of the areas that I focus on. Challenges of the way that membership process is changing. There's some things that our technology is doing to impact the timeline for membership, which we really have to pay attention to. We can identify some of those weak spots where people fall through, where people who want to join, who want to get involved, end up not doing so, and then get into small group ministry. All right, but first, 3 quotes and a note on the purpose of small group ministry. And there's me wearing my brand new glasses. So one of my favorite quotes related to congregational life is, people are not looking for a friendly church, they're looking for friends. And I think as membership professionals and people working with membership, that it's critical that we understand that just greeting people, just being friendly, smiling, giving people the information they're looking for, making sure that when they arrive, they sign up for communications, that does not meet the objective of people showing up, which is, I think, primarily relational, that people are looking for a relationship. Different things may precipitate someone visiting the church, but if they don't end up with friends, if they don't end up with relationships, they don't stay. As far as how we do that, how we help them connect and build those relationships, which is like glue, W. Edwards Deming has this quote, "It's not enough to do your best. You must know what to do and then do your best." And that's why I want to thank you for being here in this session, because we have the opportunity to talk about what is it that we have to do and how can we do it with small group ministry so that we do not miss people, lose people, because we're not quite realizing what they are, their objectives are. I'm just trying to move to my next slide. Hold on one second here. All right. Now, one of my mentors when it comes to small group ministry was the Reverend Glenn Turner. He was the district executive in the Northeast District. He's done amazing work with small group ministry, and what he says, this is in the context of talking about both the purpose of our faith and small group ministry, is that he believes that the mission of the Unitarian Universalist Church is to address the social isolation and rootlessness that is characteristic in modern life, to minister to the hurts and hopes of those in our community, and to radically define our community beyond our membership borders, seeking to bring other people who need our support into our church and into our lives. And I just love this notion that the very heart of what we're doing is bringing people into our lives, sharing our lives with others who are looking for that kind of community, and to be looking beyond our existing membership borders. Very often we can get into membership maintenance and not really look at how we can expand that and bring more and more people into it. And small group ministry is a fabulous way to bring increasing numbers of people into our congregations. So it's important that we look at the world from the perspective of someone who is looking to connect with our congregations, to have those eyes. I've been trying so hard to develop the eyes of a newcomer, and that's hard when we spend so much of our time within our congregations. So the world of the newcomer is being changed by social media. This is an important note for us to focus on, just because if you go back 10, 15 years, the way people were connecting to congregations was significantly different. Social media is changing the membership timeline. We're not going to spend much time on this, but it is critical, I think. So what social media is doing today is significantly impacting the way that people are arriving in your congregations in terms of what their expectations are as far as what's going to happen once they arrive. So big change ahead if you are really going about membership the same way that congregations have been doing so for years. So if we talk about the path to membership, for a long time we had church shopping where people would come and they would need to experience your congregation in person in order to figure out what you're all about. What social media has done is allow people to look at your congregation's website, to check out all kinds of supportive websites such as the UUA, social media, and essentially by the time someone makes the decision, there's many, many people now, make the decision to show up in person, they have already kind of pre-qualified themselves for membership. They have figured out, all right, this is what a Unitarian Universalist is. I've looked at the videos. I've read information. I've listened to podcasts. And that means that they're not expecting, I believe, to spend a long time doing research once they arrive to figure out if it's the right place for them. They're arriving pre-qualified for membership, and that means that on their first visit, what are they looking to do? It is making sure that what they have been researching, learning about you, about Unitarian Universalism online, corresponds with the reality. So one, we need to make sure that when people show up, that what they're actually seeing is what they've been promised through our social media, through our websites. We have a lot of work to do in this area, just so that people come and there's consistency, especially struggling with decent websites. Once people arrive and it's like, all right, this is looking good, by the time they get to their second visit, they are really looking to make sure that people care about them and start connecting with people in, I believe, a strong relational way, start moving towards that goal of having friends. And that's really the glue that's going to keep people there. And then, of course, if people come, they feel that they're welcomed, they're starting to make connections, that's when we start having people move into being regulars and then, of course, members. One of my favorite stories regarding this related to small group ministry, I was leading a program in Plano, Texas. They were looking to introduce small group ministry to the congregation. So we did a little service about it with the minister. After the service, we had a time for people to do a little teaser sampler session about small group ministry. So all I did is, after doing kind of the pitch to attend in the worship service, during coffee hour, people came in, and I just put them into small groups of 5, gave them a script, which included introductions and sharing the story of how they came to be there, whether it's their first-time person or have been there for 20 years, and just sharing, and just put people in group, no trained facilitator, just a question. What brought you here? There was a woman who had been there, it was her second week. First time she came with her husband. That time she came alone, and she made these connections over the next week. Her husband was blown away that she seemed like she was just and the minister emailed me this story. He said, so the husband goes, what the heck happened last week? And he was really annoyed. In that one little session, she was actually able to connect and share real personal information and real stories about her life as it related to coming to that congregation, and it made the difference between her feeling like she was trying to force her way into the congregation versus she had arrived and the congregation really wanted her there. And that's what small group ministry can do. And of course, we want with our, people are doing this kind of church shopping and figuring things out. When they do arrive, we want them to choose us, choose Unitarian Universalism. There's a shopping bag full of Unitarian Universalism. So websites, people are checking out websites. They're looking at all kinds of social media, from Facebook pages, Facebook groups, podcasts, Pinterest. There's so many ways that people can connect. But when they do come and finally arrive in our congregations, we're just moving through a bunch of examples of the kind of social media people are engaging with today. When they do arrive, they are pre-qualified for membership in a way that they never were before. And so think for a second about the membership process and the way you welcome and greet people. And think about, how is that different if your assumption is that people are arriving pretty much having made the decision that they think it's the right match, that they've arrived ready to become members. What might need to be different about the way you go about things? One thing that I notice going from congregation to congregation as a speaker and trainer is that a lot of times the opportunities for connecting, to get into groups and make friends, we have congregations where they have great groups, but the opportunity to get into those groups is not clearly available, this week, right now. When I arrived in Boston, I was curious about the small groups, and everything was semesters, and I would have to wait, 5 months to get involved in just kind of a general small group. Talk in a second about the different kinds of small groups. One of the things that this does do in terms of all the way that people are connecting, being pre-qualified, is that the amount of time, and this is one of the biggest things I think you can take away from today, is I believe, and everything I've experienced in terms of my site visits, is the amount of time that we have to connect somebody into our congregation with others, connect them relationally, is very small, very small. And if you are in the chat, you might think, how many visits do you think people have that they're going to show up, going to attend before they start making significant connections? How long do you think that is? Feel free to throw a number into the chat, and be interested to see what kind of, what your thoughts are. And I'm just going to pull open the chat in my, okay.
Peter, we have two folks so far. It says 3.
3, okay. Yeah. Excellent. See, I think we have some membership professionals here. When I talk to some lay people who are not working with membership, who do not have professionals, to that question, sometimes I get the answer, oh, yeah, 3 months to maybe 6 before people should really be getting connected. And then when I ask when should people we really be approaching people about membership, sometimes I hear, oh, after a year. It's like, no, I think I'm with the people who are saying 3 visits. I think if they've made the effort to show up, they've done their homework, they're ready to connect very soon. Maybe not sign the book, but at least to connect. And for me, that's relational. So how do we connect people? We want to get them into groups before they leave. One of the challenges our congregations have is that we have all kinds of groups, but we need to make sure, especially when we're talking about membership development and your work as professionals, is that you have the room in groups. You can plug people into groups, if they're willing, of course, regardless of how many people show up, regardless of how many. So that, just like Glenn Turner said, we want to be able to welcome all these people in. And for me, it's kind of a question of scale. Without small group ministry, there are different kinds of groups, and that can be like affinity-based groups, different topics, but there's a limit to how many seats. And so if you almost think about a congregation as having all these little receptor sites, we don't necessarily have the capacity to welcome a lot of people unless we start developing an intentional small group ministry that's actually designed to bring them in. So congregations have all kinds of small groups, classes, support groups, therapy groups, activity groups, fellowship, all kinds of programs that are held in small groups, and of course committees, task forces. That's a little bit different than what I'm talking about in terms of small group ministry. In the chat, you could identify if you have any experience specifically with an intentional small group ministry model or covenant groups. One thing that is an issue in our congregations and association at large is that we have all kinds of small groups meeting, and sometimes we use the term small group ministry or covenant group to refer to anything that is small group-like, anything that has 8 to 10 people, a chalice lighting, a check-in, the common structures and form related to small group ministry, that's been picked up by all kinds of different groups, including board meetings, where we do some of those things. But I'm talking about something very specific. So I want to talk now and just really go over what are some of the specific dimensions, characteristics of the small group ministry model that I work with. There are all kinds of different small groups and different ways to do this ministry. So this is not the only way, but I think it's helpful to look at what are some of the big principles. And then how do those principles relate to this issue of our being able to connect people in a way that is going to have a significant impact on your ability to develop your membership by making sure that people can get into groups and are welcome into groups very quickly, very quickly. So there are lots of different ways that congregations can and do groups. I said that. There are many names for all those different things, which makes it a little bit sloppy. So I'm going to tell you the name that I use for my approach to small group ministry. This is kind of like a technical name. Sometimes like there might be, with the science or in medicine, there's like this scientific name which is kind of long and cumbersome. I'm going to tell you a name like that. This is not something that I would say you should ever put in a newsletter or talk about with members. This is just to clarify the model that I'm using from all these other things. You ready? Here we go. I use a holistic and integrated approach to small group ministry. I believe that we need intentional systems, and these are getting into some of the specific traits, of holistic, lay-led small groups, and I'll explain all this next. Holistic, lay-led small groups with highly qualified, selected and trained group leaders who are working in partnership with the congregation's core ministry team. Okay, so some key traits: holistic, integrated with strong leadership working in partnership with others. All right. For me, what we want to do is within your congregation, develop a system where we can use small groups to just generally deepen and expand your ministry and through relationships, continually grow both the size of your congregation and what you're able to accomplish. And so we want to develop groups that can grow and be formed and increasingly welcome new people. So to be able to grow groups without limit. So this means that the groups that we're talking about are different than just some of the wonderful programs and ministry groups we have in the congregation. We might have a men's group, but often if there's a men's group, there's someone who's been leading it for a long time. There's only a certain size that it's comfortable growing to, and so we end up with a certain number of people in Jack's men's group. Or if someone is leading a pagan spirituality group, it's sometimes those groups end up like, all right, well, that is that person's group. It's a wonderful thing to have within our congregation, but it's not exactly like that group is specifically charged with advancing the overall ministry of our congregation.
I'm sorry, this is Mark. Sorry to jump in.
Yep.
Laurie asked if you could elaborate on what you mean by holistic.
All right. Let me say, all right, so I'm going to come to that in just a second. So, one, we're looking for, I believe, and also if you look at what large, growing, independent Christian churches do in order to grow to some of the sizes we see, they organize their ministry with a core component of having people connecting and caring for each other and doing things through small groups. So small group is the way that we're able to grow a congregation and still have the intimacy that people want. So with this, the small group ministry approach that I'm talking about, the goal is to develop a network of groups that have vision and purpose, roles, responsibilities, and communication channels, all these things that can allow what's happening in our different groups to be connected with what's happening in our larger congregation, so that we can say, all right, well, what's the purpose of our congregation? We can look at that, and then when we look at, well, what's the purpose of the small groups we're trying to put people in, they're one and the same, but the small groups are really just advancing it relationally. There are things that we can discuss and do in a small group that you can't do gathered as a full congregation. What holistic means is that in this model, they are designed for all of the members of the congregation to be able to come together. So it's not that this is a kind of group for a certain slice of the congregation. Anyone who comes into the congregation, and we're not talking about children, but more youth, young adults, and adults. So any adult, they can come in, and if someone comes in our door, we can put them in a group. What do those groups do? Well, they weave together worship, reflection, learning, social action, community building, fun, leadership development, growth. Most common, we see groups that are structured such that people come together twice a month. Sometimes it's once a month. I like twice a month. And for maybe an hour and a half to 2 hours, there's a chalice lighting, a time for sharing about what's happening in our lives, and then some focused exploration that isn't often tied to, and I think this is an increasing trend, tied to the themes in the worship services you're holding. And then through the spiritual exploration that we're doing in the groups, we're enhancing what's happening in the larger congregation through the larger goals of the congregation. We can have the groups be exploring things such that, if we're looking at a spiritual issue that's tied to some justice issue, there can be energy and excitement that comes out of the groups that can then feed into service projects and social action. And so we're really saying, all right, if we look at everything we do as a congregation, if we were to get people into small groups too and talk about those same kind of things with that same purpose, to look at the same kinds of issues that we're preaching on, to do study related to the justice issues we're passionate about, would that advance our ministry? And I think the answer is yes. And then there's the added bonus that by having these groups where we can bring people together, they get the friendships, the relational connections that they're longing for. And there's research out there that shows that in terms of the number of confidants, close relationships people have today in America, we're the loneliest people on earth, statistically. That's why it's so important we connect people. Now, you can't say if you join our congregation, you could, but I don't think it's our way to say if you want to be part of our congregation, you have to join a group. But we can take some big steps forward in saying, for us to accomplish what we want as a congregation, as a community, we need to do this together, and an important dimension of that is small groups. So that holistic notion is just that, it's intentional in that we're intentionally using groups to advance the work and ministry of our congregation, the goals of the congregation, same goals as the group, but with this relational component, and that they're holistic in that it's not a specific affinity group, but they're truly tied to the larger purpose of the congregation. Lay-led small groups. Why do we have lay-led small groups? Because we only have so many ministers. And if we have clergy leading these groups, there's going to be a cap on how many groups we can have, how often they can meet, and that means there's a limit to how many people can be in those groups. And therefore, clergy leading small group ministries, and I've seen cases of that here and there, it's limiting. What we want to do is empower lay people to lead groups working in partnership with the clergy, or it can, in a fellowship, we can have lay coordinators of the group. But those leaders are able to continually, we can take if we're having lay leaders leading the groups, we can continually cultivate leaders and grow the number of groups we have. And so for me, again, it's how many people can we connect within our network of groups? If we're having 10 visitors a week, and on average, we only have 3 seats in our small group ministries, or maybe 2, or this cycle of our groups gathering, there aren't room for more people. Well, that's a problem. We always want to make sure that our groups can bring in, I want to say absorb like a sponge, but kind of make sure that we can bring people in. And there are a lot of things we can talk about. How do you structure groups so that we're able to get more and more people to come? I do want to note that I talk about group leaders a little bit more in my work than the popular term facilitator, because for small group ministry to work in terms of really reaching the objectives we have of the vision, mission, purpose of our congregation, to get people to be excited about welcoming new people, that takes real leadership. So when I was leading small group ministries, when I started out, I was in Providence, Rhode Island, I started small groups for young adults. And as a leader, I said, one of the purposes of our group is to continually welcome people in so that anyone who wants to connect with our community, there's room for them. And for me, it was a real function of my leadership intentionally to make sure that we were welcoming people. And when I said that with conviction, and people could tell I cared, they were very happy to say, oh yeah, we're going to invite our friends, we're going to bring others into groups. So I think that group leadership is really important. Of course, groups are small. Why do we have small groups? Because when we get larger and larger groups, we stop losing the ability to have enough time to talk. The relationships get weaker. So if we have a congregation where there are lots of different offerings, but not an intentional small group ministry program that can be kind of grown to continually increase the number of people we can welcome, we end up with these affinity groups that are designed to focus on a specific topic, but relationally, they have pressure holding them at a certain size. If it's focused on some kind of discussion or spirituality or whatever the reflection is, if that's the focus, once you start getting over 10 people, there's going to be a desire for people not to have it get much larger. And so just these other kinds of groups that aren't part of this larger integrated system that has a goal of welcoming people and integrating people into the congregation, they tend to have a cap relationally. And so I think that's an important point, that you can have all kinds of great groups, and we need them. We need different kinds of groups. But do they welcome people in? And is there a function whereby they are continually bringing people into their groups and growing? One problem we have is that we have a lot of groups that are called the whatever group, the men's group, the young adult group, the this group. And when we have the group, that kind of implies that we're only going to have one of them. So instead of having this network of all kinds of groups, and we can have as many of these groups as we need to continually bring people into the heart of our community and really connect, we end up with, well, that's the group for whatever it is, and well, we only have room for, relationally, for 10 to 15 people. And so, well, that one's filled, and that one's filled. So nice to avoid the whatever group. If you have the men's group, well, maybe give it a name so you can have multiple men's group. The one that's for people this age, here's another one. We want to continue to be able to make groups so that relationally we're not limiting our capacity to welcome people. I think it's very important that we look at this as a network of groups that is in partnership with your core ministry team, that these are integrated into what the overall ministry, the goals are. So, again, if we have different kinds of groups within the congregation that are not integrated through this kind of partnership, it would be very hard, I think, for a staff person to say, hey, we need to, we have 5 or 10 or 3, however many newcomers a week, and they're looking to connect. You have to fit them in. With small group ministry, we actually want to create a network of groups with leaders who are interested in supporting this, where we can say, wow, we're getting 15 newcomers a week. We have to continually be developing new leaders and make sure that our group capacity can handle that, and that is a core objective of that ministry, to not only do phenomenal work in ministry with the people we have, but to continually expand it. And that kind of strategic partnership, staff working to advance the mission, the work of the congregation through groups with group leaders, including making sure that we're bringing newcomers in, that's a level of sophistication that we lack, I think, in many cases. And by that, I just see a lot of people visiting congregations, and it pains me, who clearly, and this is more like when I'm guest preaching, I end up talking to people, and it's like, oh yeah, it's my third time, and it's all right here. And then when I poke and prod, well, what are you looking for? It's like, well, nobody knows me. I mean, they know my name, and they're saying, hi, hey, Mark, hey, Steve, hey, whatever. It's like, how many weeks of hey, 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 hey can you stand? We have to connect them. We have to connect them. So for me, the core purposes of the small group ministries we need to develop to be able to continually grow our membership. The first one is connection. We have to have a group system that can, within a reasonable time frame, bring newcomers into these relational connections, into the community. And we talked a little bit about what's a reasonable time frame. I think it's if somebody can arrive and be like, oh, wow, this place is great, first, second visit, for them to be able to see a notice, hear an announcement, and sign up for something so that within a month they're able to get in a group, I think that's good. It doesn't have to be the next day, but if there can at least be some indication that they are going to be able to move into a group, I think that's fabulous. A lot of small group ministries in our association right now are being structured by semester, so that's like, all right, we're going to do sign-ups and get everyone who wants to into groups, and then, so that's the fall, and then we'll do another one in January, and then maybe spring. That's okay, but one thing we're lacking is this constant organic bringing people into community. I think that once we start connecting with people, we start feeling like, wow, our group is wonderful, and I know these people, and I don't want to do anything to mess it up right now. And so because of that, we end up just kind of drifting towards having groups where we form them and close them. I love it when we can create a system, and again, there's no one way to do this, but just in terms of objectives, where there's a way for people to continually come in. That is definitely something we see in a lot of much larger growing congregations, that it's easier to connect people in. Mark, was there a question?
No, Peter.
No? Oh, okay. All right. Meaning, so connection, meaning. People are coming to our congregations. These are Unitarian Universalist congregations they're showing up at. And so we have to have a way to continually help people explore issues of meaning and purpose. One thing that happens is, someone might come and there's some basic adult education offerings. We need to be able to offer people exploration and depth and opportunities for growth that can last a lifetime. So not, here's this class, here's another class, we're going to do a third version of that. But can you sign up and join a group where you are forming amazing spiritual friendships with people, where you are learning and growing, being challenged to go out and do service work and practice what everyone's preaching about, and grow into whether or not you want to become this Unitarian Universalist change agent, but at least people with whom you are supporting each other and learning to be your best self and lead your best life, and through congregational life make a difference in the world. We need to be able to do that. And so small group ministry can offer depth that people are looking for. So in addition to the basic relational component of, hey, we can connect people in, what small group ministry does is, especially when it's integrated into the larger ministry of the church and you have staff working with the system of groups in close partnership. In fact, if you have ministers, they are directing the system, this network, that through the groups we can lead people through spiritual, this path of spiritual development and create environments and opportunities that can just continually go deeper and deeper. And part of that depth is giving people opportunity to become leaders, that you learn how to facilitate groups. You learn how to welcome people. You learn how to bring people under your wing. I see people who are not only loving the spiritual exploration of small group ministry, but that they're bringing people in and turning them on to Unitarian Universalism, and then those people are going on to lead groups, and it almost becomes this group way of life. And so giving people that depth, that spiritual depth and ongoing development, I think keeps some people from drifting away who might drift away if we weren't able to deliver on that. From that spiritual depth, from exploring issues of meaning and purpose intentionally through groups, that's when we start getting, I think, people truly being inspired to take action. That, sometimes we'll say, hey, we're doing, these social justice projects and there are various opportunities, and you'll see a small committee in the congregation or a small dedicated group of people who are doing the majority of the social justice work. And everyone else is standing by and saying, that's great, but they're not doing it themselves. I think if we're going to get as many people to take action and do, and this isn't necessarily social justice, but it could be just, how do you want to make a difference in the world personally? Through these relational connections, through these friendships and the sharing and the exploration we can do, through a facilitated process, and I personally like small groups that have specific content that's been developed for them, sessions that have been developed and really well crafted, that when we help people reflect on issues in a meaningful way with great questions and great opportunities for sharing what they care about most, that starts motivating people to take action. And again, it could be social justice, or it could be articulating what kind of life do you want to lead? What do you feel your gifts are? Where do you feel most happy when you're contributing? And that could lead people to discovering new vocation, a new job, new volunteer work. And so that, together in our groups, people are just becoming their best selves. And I think, again, that's a case where, wow, when we can do that in groups, and this is a very high bar, people are getting what they signed up for when they looked at what we say we're all about on our websites and all this social media, all this, this is what we're about, that they show up, we can actually help them achieve that. I personally believe that congregations should be engines for change in people's lives, in your local community, in the larger world. And when these kind of thing, those core pillars, connection, meaning, inspired action, when these working together, that's when we really see the change in people's lives in our communities that I think we long for. And so can we do that through small groups? Absolutely. It's not always easy. It's a whole nother form of ministry that we have to learn to master. And one challenge to all of you, and I'm just going to be brutally honest with you, is that Unitarian Universalists, our association as a whole, we're still, I would say, in our infancy in terms of our mastery of small group ministry, and that we are still learning, and that there are times when we have a lot of small group ministries that have been developed, but they haven't been implemented in a way, in many, many cases, where they reach this level. And that's because we kind of implement kind of a partial model, like, put people in small groups, but then they don't meet with, say, your core ministry team for ongoing visioning and skill training and that sort of thing. And so when we have a mediocre small group ministry, this stuff doesn't happen. What happens with a mediocre, here's the indicator that you have a mediocre small group ministry. You've had the same number of people in groups for years. If it's not a growing system, it's not a healthy system, at least small group ministry-wise. Either that or there are only so many people in your zip code. But if there are people, and there are people showing up as newcomers, there are congregations out there, again, not so much Unitarian Universalists, who have more people in small groups, their small group system, than attending worship. I think that's a great goal. Can you get more people in your small groups, including members, friends, and their friends, than actually show up and worship? That's huge. People talk about, when it comes to small group ministry, people seeking intimacy and ultimacy. That people are looking for connection and meaning. And I just wanted to highlight that is, I think, one of the areas where our congregations go wrong with small group ministry. We focus on connection and meaning. But what that does is set up small groups, and I'm just sharing a little pitfalls here so you can be aware that, there's this huge thing wrong with our small group ministry, so we can fix it and grow. If you only have people focused on connecting people and exploring issues of meaning and purpose in this wonderful, cozy group, those two things pull people inward. When you put them in a group and there are great connections, those relationships start pulling people into just closer and closer and closer. It's like, wow, friends, and we're getting tighter and tighter and closer and closer. And as we explore issues of meaning and purpose and do sharing, that again pulls us closer and closer and closer. If we don't counteract that inward pull, the intimacy and ultimacy, those things pulling us inward as a group, we end up with cliques. We end up with groups that have no interest in newcomers. We have groups that tip towards being therapy groups, and then if we do put somebody in that group, it can be not a healthy situation. And so we have to counteract that inward pull. How do you do that? And so here again, we want to make sure that we're not creating a bunch of stagnant groups. What we want to do is have those groups be healthy and balanced. And so we have the inward pull of the relationship and exploration of meaning, but then the way we counteract that and have the balance outward is the leadership of those groups are in a real covenantal relationship with your ministry team, that they are advancing the mission and vision of the congregation. And that's accomplished by getting together regularly, all your group leaders or facilitators, so that you can do the three important things. And the church author, consultant Carl George talks about this. And it's VHS, V, visioning. If you don't continually talk about the vision of your congregation, what you want to accomplish with your leaders, and then they share that with their groups, people forget what the point is. Oh, yeah, we wanted to actually welcome people into our hearts and our lives. Yeah, I forgot about that. No one mentioned it for 2 years. We have to keep mentioning it. The next is huddle. We have to bring people together, the group leaders, with the leaders of your ministry team, clergy or lay people, and talk about group life so that we are attending to what this looks like. Is it healthy? Is, what's happening in your group? You had 6 people drop out of your group over the past 2 months. Is there something wrong? Oh, you're a horrible facilitator. We need to know that. We need to know if there's a problem. So we have to really attend to what's happening in our groups. And that could happen in facilitator meetings or clustering facilitators together and having them go out for Chinese food and talk shop. That's what I used to do, talk groups over coffee or Chinese food. And when we have those sessions, regardless of the context, whether it's full team with the minister or smaller coaching circles, that's when we identify that there are issues where somebody needs skill training. Like, I don't know what to do when this person never stops talking. Or, hey, somebody in my congregation is dealing with, in my small group, is dealing with grief or cancer or some significant issue. How do I deal with that? So we identify those needs, and then together we can work on that. But without group leaders who are in partnership with the larger ministry team of your congregation, the focus just kind of gets too inward focused in groups, and we lose that sense of purpose. And if that happens, then we start seeing groups that become just a little unhealthy, cliques. They become just more still nice, but stagnant and not as open to newcomers, and some of these core functions of welcoming people, they drop off. So that's a very high bar for what we can do with small group ministry. Again, there's a lot of details as far as how do you train people, what do you talk about, what's the structure of sessions. I'd welcome questions about that. There are amazing resources around that on the Unitarian Universalist Small Group Ministry Network website, which I'll share the link with you at the end. But I hope that makes sense, that if we have people showing up, regardless of how many visitors it is per week, if they aren't able to connect relationally, then we're going to have a number of them fall through the cracks. And I think about it as relational cracks. Just not enough receptor sites in our congregation relationally to hold them. And that without a certain kind of group system, this small group ministry system, we often end up with great groups, but that just are not up to the challenge of welcoming people, having the kind of depth and purpose long term, and that can grow our congregation. And so, my hope is that every congregation is going to have this amazing diversity of different kinds of groups, but they're also going to have a fabulous small group ministry at the heart of congregational life. Whether it's a fellowship, or a lot of people tell me, oh, you can't do it in a fellowship. I don't agree. Whether it's a fellowship or a congregation with ministers, clergy, that we can create the system where when people arrive, and with your help, we can connect them in amazing groups that can really take them into the heart of congregational life and give them what they showed up for. So 3 recommended resources. Well, one, my website, my consulting website is leadingcongregations.com. My wife, the Reverend Amy Friedman, and I both consult on small group ministry. The Small Group Ministry Network, which I helped start years ago, but now I'm not part of their leadership. They're doing fabulously. On their own, they don't need me, hooray, is a Small Group Ministry Network, and that's smallgroupministry.net. They have some fabulous collections of small group ministry sessions for content, how-to resources just to structure this, and resources for sale, including how to train facilitators and other important information. And then the UUA has a great collection of small group ministry resources. Easiest thing to do is go to UUA.org and just type small group ministry in the search bar, but the website is listed there. And so now I would love, with Mark's help, to open it up to questions to talk about just issues related to that theory, the logistical questions. We have a good chunk of time now when we can tackle that. So if you have questions, Mark, how should people ask questions?
Great. Well, thank you, Peter. There should be somewhere on your screen a red flag It's in different places depending on the device that you're using. If you Peter's got it. If you want to ask a question or make a comment, just raise the flag and I'll call on you in order. If you're on the phone, you can press *1 when I call on you and you can be heard. If you're calling in on the internet, I will unmute you, and then you'll be able to ask your question. Give me just a moment.
Sure.
Okay. So Molly, you should be unmuted.
Hello? Can you hear me, Peter?
Yes, I can. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you for this. It's wonderful stuff. My question is about age and other life stage clusters.
Okay.
For instance, young adults or other kinds of sort of life stages. Do you recommend clustering those people together in a holistic system like this, or do you recommend?
So here's what I recommend. That one, it's if you're starting from scratch, say, and it's another question, like what do you do if you already have an existing small group ministry that isn't particularly healthy? But if you're starting from scratch, what I would do is focus on general groups that are open to everyone, of different, all from young adults through adults, and then, but expect that as you're going about the process of talking about small group ministry, signing people up, to be mindful of, are there opportunities to cluster people? And so what we don't want to do is just immediately start trying to divide it up into all these, focused little clusters, but just to have a strong set of groups that are open, for people of all different ages. Because I think one of the things that our congregations can offer people that they cannot get increasingly in our society is an amazing intergenerational community. And with people being mobile, moving all over the place, there are a lot of people who just do not have relationships with people of different ages. Like, say, a young adult having grandparent figures around or whatever it is. So we want to make sure that we have that available. But in my experience, when I was in Providence, we started off our small group ministry, and I knew just from the work I was doing as a young adult leader at that time, that was a long time ago now, there were people who were looking to connect with other young adults. So what we did is we started, and this is with the full consent and knowledge of the small group ministry team we had and the minister, a young adult small group. What happened? Immediately there are people like, oh yeah, I want that. And so we got a good group of 8 people. And then it was clear as more and more people started getting into that group that there's this growing age range, from brand new to college up to people who are more in grad school. And, the grad school people weren't as interested in hanging out with the college age people, the 18 to 24, whatever. And then those people, they're interested in each other. So what we did is very quickly, we noticed that it was kind of an issue almost immediately, is we said, oh, you know what, we're just going to keep growing and reaching out to other people until we have room for more groups, or enough people to form multiple groups. So within 18 months, we went from having one small group for young adults of 5 people at the first session to 3 small groups, a college group, kind of a middle range, in the mid to late 20s, and then a 30s group. The college group, they went on to form the Brown University campus group because they had, they were college age and they were really psyched. And so we were able to have these amazing 3 groups form that were clustered. And even though, they became specialized in age, they still organized to do activities together. So though they were part of this larger small group ministry system of the congregation, all the facilitators were trained by the minister and other people, and we went to facilitator meetings together. But we also, as a cluster of 3 groups, had our own social events. So the small group ministry system with this young adult subcomponent ended up being the engine for a thriving young adult ministry. And so say if some great young adult leaders came through the congregation, there might be a time when, wow, there are all these great young adult activities that were happening in addition to small group ministry. But when those charismatic, energizing leaders left, it wouldn't fall down to nothing. It just kind of collapsed back down to this base level of we have great groups for young adults. And I think you can do the same thing with there's some people who would love to have a group that is for, say, single parents or single mothers. Or I know a congregation where they have a group who they want to be part of the regular small group ministry system, but they're a bunch of people who really have this Buddhist Eastern affinity. And so they started a small group that did the exact same thing as other groups, but they intentionally had a meditation period in the beginning, 20-minute meditation. And so I think we can do things. So it's just a question of starting with a healthy model and then seeing where the opportunities are. I did see a great example of someone who wanted to be part of a small group, but she had a couple of kids, didn't know how she could do it. There was talk about, do we start a parents group and hire babysitters? What ended up working is the group ended up saying, hey, you know what, if we meet later at night, instead of 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night, what if we met at your house after the kids went to sleep? And they did that for years. So the single mom ended up becoming the host of the small group. Is really fabulous. So, yeah, so yes, we can cluster, and I think that's fabulous.
Great. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Molly. Before I ask Shannon to share, Laurie Emma Sinclair wrote that on the chat box, we experienced some natural divisions by having midweek daytime groups, a lunch hour group, and a group where childcare is available, not hardline division, but people who are retired migrated to daytime group, etc.
So yeah, I mean, I think when you offer groups, it's going to potentially skew the participants a certain way. Was there a specific question related to that, or is that just
No,
I think that's a good observation. Yeah, that when you offer groups, does make a difference. If you were to offer a group like, hey, we're going to go have people get together at 9 o'clock at night at this coffee shop every week, well, that's going to be a certain kind of group.
Great, thanks, Peter. Shannon, you should be unmuted.
Hello.
Yeah, hi, Shannon.
Hi. We are just getting ready. Well, we are in the process of just learning about this and going to be starting from scratch.
Yep.
How do you then structure this so that it will perpetuate and not get full? Do you just start out with a much smaller number of people in each group, or? Okay.
So there are a few things that we can do to keep groups growing. The first one is educate people about what I call the intimacy trap. You ready? This is the intimacy trap. You have people who have not experienced a really amazing small group experience before. You put them together in a group. We don't have a lot of cases where people can get into, as adults, get into groups and talk about deep, meaningful, awesome things in an intentional way. So when we put people in that group, what almost happens every single time is people go, oh my God, this is fabulous. Not everyone, but a lot of people are like, this is magic, and I love it. Don't you dare change it. And people start attributing the wonderful things that are happening in the group to the people in that group. And yes, those people matter, but what's happening in that group is a function of the design of that group experience. And so to let facilitators know that, and they can let their group members know, when we do this, we're going to get to know each other really quickly. But one of the things that we can't do is let our relationships, as we get to know each other, turn us off to welcoming new people. Because Unitarian Universalism, if we care about that, we want to share it. And so to let people know that, and so this is just one way to go about it. I like telling people, when I lead a group, I tend to have open groups where we say, what, we are not going to just have people coming in, randomly, but I always talk to people, if you know someone who you'd like to invite to one of our sessions, feel free. And And that would happen a lot because when I lead groups, I always have the group do things related to congregational life together. So if there's a potluck, it's like, hey, let's go to the potluck together. Who are you going to invite? Who's going to join us? Or, if there's, new movies, going to dinner. So like around the group, there's this little bit of group life, community that's happening in addition to whatever's happening in the larger congregation. So when we go out and do things as a group, that's not churchy things, but just exciting things that people care about. See the new blockbuster movie and we invite our friends, invariably someone's going to mention what happened in the group, and then people end up saying, well, what's that about? And so we can cultivate a culture where we have great groups, there is depth, we're getting to know each other, but we have a commitment to welcoming people into our congregation. I mentioned a few things that kind of tip people or tip groups towards being closed, and I think if we don't, that's a culture that I think the leadership of your small group ministry needs to establish and model from the beginning. If it's not there, then groups tend to close. One fix to that is not all groups need to function exactly the same way. So some people who are group leaders tend to have more of do a better job of just kind of caring for their existing group. I have a colleague who's a Christian church planter, and he talks about there being two kinds of people. There are shepherds, people who do caretaking, hold the community, and then there are rabbits, people who just like multiplying in groups. And we can take people who are real, like I'm a rabbit, okay? By that model, I'm a rabbit. I just love bringing people in, welcoming them. It's like, hey, you've arrived in a group, hooray, and build the group. And then I'm like, hey, group, will someone in here take over this group for me? Great, because I'm going to go start another group. And so I'm just leaving a trail of groups behind me. Form a group, train people to take it over, move on. And I can be the assembler of groups. So we don't necessarily need everyone all the leaders of our small group ministries to be that like, yay, welcome people. But we can identify people with that strength and then uphold that value of welcoming people. So, those are a couple things we can do to help keep group open. And there's some others, but that's a good place to start. Oh, the other thing is comes to how you structure the leadership. One model, which I've not seen in Unitarian Universalist congregations. I unfortunately do not have my own congregation at the moment to tinker around with, like a laboratory, maybe someday. But the model is when you start a group, you start it with two leaders, each who have already made a commitment to growing that group into two groups. So in the same sense in biology, we have our chromosomes. We have two sets of chromosomes, and we have that so that they can move when the cell divides, and that the cell can end up dividing. So if you start off with a group and say, hey, we're forming this group, and I'm facilitating this or leading this group with Mark, and Mark and I know that there are tons of people coming through here all the time, and people too who would love this kind of experience. So we are just going to be mindful of who in our circles, and also the congregation is going to keep an eye out for people who want this, and we're going to just slowly welcome people into our group. And as it starts growing, Mark and we're going to be having a waiting list that we're maintaining with the registrar of our small group ministry. And when we have enough people, we're going to move to two groups. One of the beauties of doing that, starting with two leaders, is that if you tell people on day one, hey, we're going to have two groups, immediately some people are going to be like, Mark, can I be in your group? When it splits, can I be in your group? And then other people are going to be like, hey, Peter, let's go have a cup of coffee and coffee hour. People naturally start forming affinities with the two group leaders, and then you never get to the situation where you say, well, we've been meeting for a year, and guess what? Now we're going to divide you. And everyone's like, what do you mean you're going to divide us? We're a family. It's like, no, from day one, you had two group leaders, and everyone knew that growth and division was the plan. So we can grow groups that way. We can have, those little Energizer, group making bunnies keep making groups, and then, of course, uphold that culture. All right, that's enough on that one. Next question.
Well, Peter, just to affirm what you said, Sharon Peterson wrote that it's a great idea, 2 leaders to split into 2 groups later.
Yep, and there's a lot of writing in just small group literature to support that. And again, that's not going to happen if we have leaders who are just leading groups without support. We need them to be connected to a larger small group ministry leadership system, with that being connected to your professional staff, because then they can say, hey, let's really work to make sure that we have those 2 leaders. And I would say, a person asked the question, I'm sorry, I forget your first name, do we start with fewer people? I think it's great to start with fewer people. Don't start full. Start with a few less, and day one, you encourage people in the group, say, hey, keep an eye out for people who might want this, so that we get them used to doing that. A fun story, when I split when I went on to start another group from that young adults group I was talking about, so we had a full group, and then there were 4 people on the waiting list. So I was thinking, all right, 5 people total is a little small. I know I'm going to be able to find more people. Who could I ask to join this group temporarily? Because I wanted to have a nice number for our first session. I asked my sister, who had not been to a UU church. She grew up UU. She's living in town where my home church was. She had not been to church in years. And I asked my best friend, Jewish, will you come for a couple of sessions? Because I'm going to have to be able to get more people, but I just want to have a few more for this first session. They each stayed for 2 years. And now my sister, she's like core member of our congregation. She's been, head of the personnel committee, doing all these things. She sings at a band at the church. So nice to, so there are all kinds of ways we can invite people, but.
Nice.
Yeah.
And the irony, Peter, in your story is that in the end, your sister wound up converting to Judaism.
Oh, yeah.
Just kidding.
Yeah.
I just want to note that, since people can't see this, that Sharon added that she likes that notion of 2 leaders in a group, and the idea of telling the group members to expect that from the beginning.
Yeah, and I think people are smart. And if you say, hey, here's what we're doing, and this is why we're doing it, and you believe it, if the leader is on board, I think it's a good time to note that not all leaders are going to love that idea. So that's why I say a small group ministry, it's good to have leaders who are selected and trained, so that you need to make sure that the people are on board with not facilitating a group and talking about stuff. All kinds of people are fine with that. But are you on board with intentionally working with us, your ministry team? Like, we're sharing this ministry that we're responsible for with you, the group leaders. Are you willing to do this? And we have a covenant, and everyone says, yeah, I will do that. And we've mapped it out. I love having a nice little binder where we have the policies and procedures and what our model is just written out. And actually, the Small Group Ministry Network has some great resources you can buy that include those documents. So that, this is a good opportunity to talk about, well, how do you train group leaders? Some of our congregations come up with the most crazy long, convoluted things. It's like, you go into boot camp for 6 weeks. Who's going to do that? Come on. There's a great story, Rick Warren of Saddleback Church. I listened to a leadership podcast with him, and so he had this problem where, they needed to find leaders for, 4,000 groups, because they're launching their small group thing, and they're this huge congregation. It's like, they're taking their group system to the next level. How do we get people to be group leaders? And he was finding that people were scared of the terms they were using for leaders. No one wanted to be a group shepherd. No one wanted to be a group leader. And they kept trying all these different terms, and in the end, they came up with host. Will you be a host? And that's just have a heart for other people, so be open and caring. Will you open your home to others? Will you serve snacks and tea, because they're this big giant church with lots of money? they had their small group ministry content on DVDs. So the T is, will you turn on the DVD player? So they kind of come up with this, make a reasonable amount of what the expectation of group leaders are, but they made it clear, made it so it wasn't too hard. What I like for our congregations to do is train initial leaders, and then for subsequent leaders, work with our leadership to identify people within our groups who have potential. So, if you say get a little packet of seeds from the store and it says pumpkins on the outside, you can't open that and see pumpkins inside. You have to grow it. You have to cultivate it. Same thing with our groups. If you look at a group, you might say, oh, there's no leader in here. Well, it's because we have to cultivate those leaders, and we can do that by giving people the opportunity to light the chalice for us. Oh, Janet, will you lead check-in? Hey, Bob, will you, or whomever, will you want to help me pick our next group session sometime? And we can do all these things as leaders to involve people in the actual leadership tasks, the individual leadership tasks of the group. And then over time, it's like, wow, you know what? These three people are really good. And then if I need to go lead another group, or we want to move towards splitting the group, or just identify group leaders, we already know who they are. We've been cultivating them. So a lot of small group ministries end up being stagnant because the system is not doing the leadership development, and so they run out of leaders. So we need to make sure that we're growing leaders, and that's one of the things that we do in our group leadership meetings, facilitator meetings with the ministry team is, when we're talking about that, what's happening within group life, that huddle part of that is how are you cultivating leaders? One of the things that I'd always, when I'm leading a group, make sure there's a time when I'm not going to be available for the group, and I force someone else to lead the group. I don't even tell them why I can't be there. I say, oh, I can't come, but, Joanna, you've been doing so great. Would you do it for me? And they step up, and they're like, oh, wow, that was great. I really did it. And so we end up with people who actually know they can lead a small group. And then what does our training end up being? Well, you've already done the group. You led the group. If you commit to, if you want to go down this leadership path, well, here's the binder that has all the information. We get together and make sure that you're on board with all of it, you like the idea, and we could actually start having you come to our leadership meetings to check it out. And so it's this real cultivation. And so it becomes the small group ministry system in the leadership development, and the leadership development drives growth, I believe. That becomes this ongoing process. So we don't end up in an ideal situation where it's like, oh, we have 20 people who want to be in groups. Where are we going to get group leaders? No. We're working on that leadership development from the start. All right, how are we doing?
Great. Thanks, Peter. Well, Molly and Shannon, your flags are still up. I don't know if it's left over, if you had another question. So if not, if you take your flag down, if you do have a follow-up question, I'll just unmute you. And Peter, I don't see any other flags up. So if anyone else has a question or a comment. So Shannon, your flag's still up, but I'm going to go to Sharon first. And okay, great. Actually, Carol Swigert had her flag up earlier. So Carol, I'm going to give me just a moment, and I'll unmute you. Carol, if you called in on the phone, I don't see your name. You could probably just star 1 on your phone, and that should unmute you, and then Sharon can come up next. Carol, we don't hear you yet. Carol, let's try this. If you could type in your phone number on the chat box, and then I'll be able to unmute you from here. Okay, here we go. Thank you, Carol. Give me 1 second. Carol, I don't see your number on the list. If you called in, star 1 isn't unmuting you. Here we go. Hold on 1 second. Let me try this. should be unmuted now. Carol, I unmuted you. Well, why don't we go to Sharon, and then we'll see if we can work out the problem. Okay, so Sharon, hold on one sec. Sharon, you also called in. If you could either type in your phone number or press *1 to unmute. Sorry for the delay, folks. I'm doing everything, I think, right on this end. But
hey, thank you, Mark, for working the technology for us.
Oh, I'm doing my best. I'm not good with technology, Peter. If the light bulb goes, I have to rely on one of my family members. Sharon, you said that you're all set. I guess that means that you don't have a question or a comment. Okay. And I don't know what's happening with Carol. I have your phone number, Carol, and I have you unmuted. So Carol is typing it in.
Okay, great.
And Peter, she writes, we have leaders and groups meet for a 1-year cycle, 9 months.
Yep.
This was how we wanted to avoid ongoing, internally focused groups.
So let me just talk a little. Is there more? Okay, so one thing, here's a challenge, and I want you to think about what I was saying before about how groups have a natural pull inward as a result of relationship and the kind of exploration we do. You know, when we talk about our spiritual paths, personal experience, all these things bring us closer and closer together. Because a lot of small group ministries are not being run in such a way so that they have the opposite pull, which is outward, of vision and mission and leadership development and intentional great support and coaching, because groups are left to their own, job of counteracting the inward pull, congregations impose these cycle limits. It's like, we're doing a semester group, we're doing a 9-month group. And so that is a great fix for the problem of inward pull, except that we lose some of the depth and the true long-term benefits of small group ministry, and the growth, I believe, comes from the system that is a loving, caring, passionate, exciting, challenging system of groups where we're growing, we're looking for people, we're learning how to bring people into our lives, we're mentoring each other, we're developing relationships for years. Like, there were the people who ended up leading the other small groups in that young adult situation I talked about, where there were 3 small groups. And I was leading a group, there were 2 other groups, each with 2 leaders. So there are 4 other leaders that I was working with. The people who are leading those groups were the shyest people in the initial group. But it was the group process and also my encouraging them to try doing different things in the group that allowed them to blossom. And that took a matter of like 11 months, 12 months, 13 months. Some people, it took a long time. If we're talking about people maturing and growing, blossoming, developing as people, if small group ministry is going to be a place where we can do this thing called Unitarian Universalism in a very intentional, deep, and amazing way, if we don't have the sophistication to have the leadership development and the vision and all the things to keep it healthy and just cut the groups off, we just cut off a lot of the benefit. And the main benefit that I would say we're cutting off, which you should all care about, is one that is a healthy, outward-focused, growing system, one where people are looking to not only who can we bring in to our groups, who's stepping into our congregation, but how do we take this thing, Unitarian Universalism, our faith and values, and put it into the world. Very hard to be doing that and getting to that point in 6 months, 9 months, a year. So, I totally understand why, but I would say if you're having those problems of, oh, our groups are becoming closed and cliquish, call me. I can do an intervention. I mean, we can talk, and maybe what you don't do is, oh, let's change the whole system, but you can come up with, like, let's identify some leaders who really have that passion and empower them to try a more growth-oriented model, this other kind of approach that I'm talking about, and see if it works. We can experiment. I mean, and we need to learn and experiment. So I hope that makes sense, that in the absence of, you know, the counterbalance to the inward pull, you know, without that, groups are spiraling inwards. Of course we got to shut them down. It's like, shut them down before they turn into horrible, closed, insular therapy groups or private groups that don't care about the congregation. And that happens everywhere, not to be judgmental, but I mean, that is happening in the majority of our congregations, that we're imposing a timeline, like shortening the cycle of the group, the cycle length, to avoid the real problem, as opposed to fixing the problem, which is a better model. And another problem is that Unitarian Universalists studied the model that non-Unitarian Universalists were using, and then when Bob Hill's book, and I've talked to him about this, when his book came out, what started happening is one of the best resources out there is Glenn Turner's Designing and Implementing a Small Group Ministry for Your Congregation. It's a free resource on the Small Group Ministry Network website. It's still there. And what he did is included sessions for you to study with your board, with your small group ministry design and implementation team, but is looking at what other denominations were doing. And when Bob Hill's book, The Complete Guide to Small Group Ministry, came out, they switched from giving you resources to look at outside of our denomination to the UU book. Read this chapter of the UU book. Read that chapter. And there's all kinds of knowledge, which I've been talking to you about tonight, which got erased. So Unitarian Universalists who didn't quite get the model are teaching each other how to do the model. And that's a huge failure. So I'm doing my part slowly. This will be recorded. Please share this webinar. Right, Mark?
Yep, absolutely. Great. We just have a few minutes left.
Yeah,
Are there any other comments or questions for Peter before we adjourn? Peter, I think that you were very thorough.
All right. Well, awesome. So, Mark, thank you for hosting. And I just want to thank everyone who's been participating and for your work in ministry. Is so important. I want to leave you with a story. There's a woman who came into our congregation, a newcomer. This is when we were in Newport. And I was like, all right, she's new. She seems very interested. She's checking things out. She's being greeted. She goes up during Joys and Sorrows. And this is one of my favorite stories. And she says during Joys and Sorrows, hi, my name is so-and-so. And hallelujah, I found my spiritual home. And, you know, in coffee hour I was talking to her, and in coffee hour we were talking, and she said, you know what, I'm so glad I found this. And she's like, you know, but it's taken me 40 years. And she started realizing, wow, my life could have been so much better if I had this place sooner. And we had an emotional conversation about like how, you know, we need to do better as congregations to welcome people. But one of the things that she observed is that there are a whole bunch of people in coffee hour that she knew. You know, Jack, she worked with at this organization. She saw this guy at the library, this other person in the book group, and she never got invited to the church. She never got connected. And I think one of the things small group ministry can do is create a kind of experience and a culture, if we do it right, where people are really comfortable inviting their friends. Like, hey, you want to come to my group? And I think this could be a key to really changing a lot of people's lives. So I hope you will pursue, really work at this small group ministry thing, and know that I'm a resource, and the Small Group Ministry Network has great resources. And there's even, if you're on Facebook, the Small Group Ministry Network has a Facebook group, and that's a great place to get just like easy, quick, free little advice. And I am in that group too, and I answer questions there too. So So thank you, and be in touch. And again, Mark, thank you for having me and for helping out tonight with the technology.
Oh, you're welcome, Peter. My pleasure. Thank you for your time and your expertise. A couple of quick things before we adjourn. Again, I apologize for the confusion around the starting time, and I appreciate your flexibility in that. That won't happen again. This is being recorded. It will be archived, and I'll be in touch with you to let you know how you can access this. I've also been asked by UUAMP to facilitate future webinars in this series, and I'm honored and really pleased to do so. I just put my email address up on the screen. If you have ideas, suggestions for future webinars, please feel free to email me, and I'll be happy to to take that feedback. So thank you all very much. Thank you for your time, and have a wonderful rest of the evening.
All right, you too. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Peter.